정년 예, 정년퇴임 기념 강연식이 있습니다. 그래서 오늘 1시부터 2시간 동안 있는데요. 저희 일단 교수님 시작하시기 전에 저희 원장님 인사말이 간단하게 있으시겠습니다. 예, 저희 이기영 원장님. 예.
네, 안녕하십니까. 보건대학원 원장 이기영입니다. 우리 백동 교수님 오늘 지금 정년퇴임 기념 강연식인데요. 한마디로 좀 밉습니다. 왜 지금 정년을 지금 제가 원장하는 이 시기에 하셔가지고 굉장히 저를 학교를 좀 많이 이 중심을 잡아주시고 하시던 분인데 지금 이제 정년을 하셔가지고 이렇게 기념식을 갖게 됐습니다. 백도민 교수님 제가 처음 뵌 게 한 30년 전입니다. 미국 보스턴에서 제가 미국에 보스턴에 도착하는 날 보스턴을 떠나셨어요. 그래서 같이 식사만 잠깐 하고 가셨는데 그게 30년 전인데 어느덧 이제 은퇴하시고 옆에서 30년을 봐가면서 참 많은 단어들을 가지고 백도명 교수님을 이렇게 설명할 수 있을 것 같은데 저는 여기에 있는 것 중에 참삼이라는 글자가 좀 단어가 마음에 와닿고 그래도 백도명 교수님 잘 설명해 주는 그러한 단어가 아닌가 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 너무 아쉽고요. 우리 학교에 조금 더 계셨으면 좋겠는데 제가 원장인데 힘이 없더라고요. 그래서 이 정년 연장 이런 것 좀 했으면 좋겠는데 네. 그래서 참 아쉽지만 또 항상 제가 백도민 교수님의 강연을 들으면 뭘 많이 배워요. 그래서 제가 노트도 갖고 왔습니다. 이렇게 적으려고. 근데 제목부터 시스템 사이언스라는 제목으로 강연을 해주시고 해서 여기 계신 분들과 또 여기 온라인으로 참여하시는 분들이 단순히 그냥 기념이 아닌 진짜 참에 대한 얘기를 들을 수 있지 않을까 이렇게 기대하고 기대하겠습니다. 네, 다시 한번 믿고요. 우리 백준호 교수님 믿고 하지만 좋은 메시지를 또 마지막에 전달해 주실 것을 믿고 저도 가서 노트 필기하면서 열심히 듣도록 하겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다.
코로나 이후로 마스크를 계속 썼던 것 같은데 제가 목소리가 좀 작다 보니까 벗고 저거를 하도록 하겠습니다. 또 한 가지 아마 양해 말씀을 드려야 되는 거는 이 지금 그 강의가 사실은 저희 보건대학원의 보건학개론 마지막 강의입니다. 특히 영어로 하는 그 마지막 강의여서 저도 영어로 아마 강의를 해야 되는 이제 그런 것 같습니다. Well, thanks, my dean and colleagues. This is kind of the last lecture of actually introduction to public health science, and also last lecture for my kind of formal professorship. So in both ways, I guess I'm more than kind of honored or delighted to have this opportunity to say something in the course of the public health to talk about what public health is. And let me see. Is this? Okay. I'm still kind of struggling a bit about this technology, and well, during the last 1 year was a kind of adaptation period, but I don't know. So let me just begin because to save the time. I'm sorry, this is not. This is, okay, this is to save to share the screen, and today I will talk about actually my lessons while kind of conducting or practicing public health research during my career. I will talk mainly 4 lessons. However, no, sorry. Yeah. Well, so some of the lesson is more is more or less kind of a story, but some of the lessons are somewhat abstract in that I try to get some meaning from that story. So in total, I have about 70 to 80 slides. So I'm expecting about an hour or just a bit more for my talk. At the beginning of this course, in the first class, I actually talked about the definition of health and also public health. And here I suggested health as an embodied outcome of system risks and public health as a science of a health risk system. It's somewhat difficult to make sense out of this kind of definition. It's somewhat, I guess, very abstract one, a very kind of, and also I gave a, well, I thought that that's a new definition of health. So as a, in essence, the health is an integrated capability. So that health for a person is the integrated, I'm sorry, let me just, integrate the level and duration of his or her capabilities with others. So here I wanted to emphasize that the health in essence is a capability, but it should be a capability enabled by the others through the society. And in that way, so I gave the definition of health for a group or persons is the range and the mean of the integrated capabilities that have been enabled and maintained by the given ecological, social, and cultural systems. And in doing that, I gave the definition of public health so that here I kind of said that public health is a scientific discipline about the system for health risk identification, assessment, and control. That is to study and build a better health risk system. These definitions, I guess, makes you wonder what that is. Very abstract and very kind of theoretical ones. So instead of repeating these abstract meanings, I here in this talk would like to talk about the 4 lessons that I have learned, as I said, during my practice of public health research in my career. And the 4 lessons here I listed. First, not just causal factors, but layers, factors, and pathways are important in fixing the problem. The second lesson that I will talk about is in fixing the problem, not just problems, but also alternatives at multiple levels of causal pathways, including the ones for the root cause. Yeah, that will be the second lesson. And the third lesson is that in fixing the problem, victim-oriented approaches in devising alternatives to distribute the burden of uncertainties away from the vulnerable was the third lesson. And the fourth lesson was the changes are not linear or incremental, but convoluted and stepwise in all 3 areas of cultures, stakeholders, and systems. So these will be my kind of conclusion, but I'm first kind of giving you the outline of what I will say. So as for the first lesson, in fixing the problem, I think we have to focus layers of risk factors from proximal to distal, and even to the structures of society, environment, and work as risk factors. In saying that, the risk, the causes or the risk can range over different layers or different levels. So some of the risks are quite mechanistic, and some of the risks are more or less probabilistic. And there are different layers of causalities. And I said the different, the proximal causes are more than kind of the ones that are near to the outcome. But the distal cause are far from the outcome, but can determine in the upstream. And acute events and chronic events are the ones that we can determine the cause and outcome in a very short time, or in a very long latent, over the long latent period. And in that way, some of the causes, I think, are structural. I think are very distal. I think are very kind of upstream. And I will talk about one of the causes of the environmental problems in terms of the environmental justice. Here, the environmental justice is defined as the kind of the fair treatment and the meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, blah, blah, blah. And this goal, the justice, will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards and equal access to the decision-making process. So this is straightforward. Kind of the what you can imagine as a just environmental justice is like this. So here, definition I'm repeating, but there are some more components to the environmental justice definition, but let me skip. So in the other way around, the environmental injustice can be defined as an unfair distribution of environmental benefits and burdens and protections, and such as probably some of you have heard about onsan or yeocheon, and these are kind of the two petrochemical the towns situated nearby to kind of the petrochemical complexes. And also the other kind of definition of environmental injustice can be unfair treatment in the meaningful participation in the environmental decision making. And you heard about the controversy on in Miryang, what is that? The power line, the electrical power line, and also the power plants in Chungcheong, Namdo, in determining these justice, the environmental justice or injustice, we can approach the kind of the problem with the mindset of environmental epidemiology or study. And usually what we do in this environmental study is examining the health effects from the kind of pollution and up to the kind of pressure and drivers of the pollution. So some of you might be familiar with this deep sea framework in which the drivers kind of push the development, and it creates some pressure to make a pollution source. And this pollution source kind of contaminates the environment, the media, as a kind of state. So this state affects the individual or kind of the people. So in that way, the people are exposed, and it over the time it kind of manifests as a health effect. So this is a kind of continuous process, takes time. So what we do in environmental epidemiology is pick bit of information from each of these and try to connect that as a whole process. So we assess the sources, the pressure, we assess the exposure path, the state through the media or biological samples, and we assess the health itself as an effect by comparing with the control groups and so on. This way, we can identify, study the environmental impact as well as kind of the environmental justice or injustice. And here I did a study in Namon. Some of you might heard about Negi Maul, the Namon Negi, Negi town. And I want to compare that to the Iksan, in the same kind of Iksan Jangjom town. These are the two towns in rural area with pollution source. In Namon, Negi, there is a not big, but a fair size of ascon plant. And in Iksan and Jangjom, there's a fertilizer plant. And these are more or less kind of the sources of the pollution. And the study sponsor who had kind of was a research fund was for the Namon Negi. It was Korean CDC, 질병관리 본부 at that time. And for 익산 장점, it was 환경과학원, Korean Environmental Research Institute. And the kind of one of the difference between these two studies was that for the Namon, health was in charge of the Ministry of Health, so that the CDC, which is under the Ministry of Health, was responsible for the health problem. But industry was under the charge of the local municipality. And also the general environment was in charge of the Ministry of Environment. So health, industry, environment, all three of them were separately managed, separately approached. Instead, in Jangjam, the health and environment was approached by the same ministry or same stakeholder. So a little bit of difference. And what happened was that I did the NEGI study in 2016. And this article in Hangare in 2019 say that it was a kind of failure. Nothing have changed. And because of the poor study at 3 years ago. And may request a restudy or it says that many different factors, but ambiguous conclusions. And even I think this a person, a researcher, who had studied, who had measured the radon, environmental radon in this area. I think his assertion, his claim here saying that the outdoor radon was higher and was this kind of source of the problem. I don't think that's a correct conclusion. We measured indoor and outdoor radon, but outdoor radon was not a consistent. Wasn't a problem. Here, in another article, the NEGI was a case study of this failure in risk communication. So the Namon study was regarded as a failure, based on that, no change was brought after the study. The absence of the change or problem, and makes me think, why it didn't make any change? And there could be several different explanations. One thing was that the management was divided into 3 different stakeholders. I talked about the health management was CDC, and ministry was industry. Industry was managed by the local municipality, and the environment, especially the radon, was managed by the Ministry of the Environment. So was 3 different stakeholders were there, but they are not connected. They worked separately. And here I said no feedback between stakeholders of the system. So the Congress was separate. They have different ideas about this. So they brought this to the CDC, this case, and CDC asked me actually to conduct this. I guess I guess for the benefit of my kind of background, I mean, Congress, central government, local government, and ministries are all separated or not connected. Because of that, we couldn't discuss any broader alternatives in this process. And I guess the residents, the community people, felt that there is no meaningful participation in this study. So these kind of, logic might have contributed to the failure. Another thing is the 장점 was studied, well, not long time after, but just it was studied in 2017 or 18, and the conclusion for the 장점 Mall town was that the health problem was related with the environment, but actually I gave the same conclusion for the Negi, but what was that in the Negi case, only that the carcinogen, I mean the polyaromatic hydrocarbon, PAH, was from the ascom plant, and there was also radon, indoor radon problem, and also there was many of them were male smokers, I mean smoking problems. So these were kind of interacting synergistically to make the very high lung cancer problems in Negi Mall. But in 장점 Mall, they focused more or less kind of the fertilizing, I mean the problems to the source itself, and so the conclusion from the 장점 was accepted as valid, and then managed as properly. And the reason why that was possible was actually there are several developments in the Ministry of Environment. At first, the Ministry of Environment didn't deal with these environmental health problems at first, but over the years, they began to take issues as their own agenda, such as the environmental asbestos, or humidifier disinfectants, or kind of the hydrofluoric accidents in the community as their own problems. So these cases, I mean, the environmental asbestos was none of the business before, but the Ministry of Environment say that is my business. And humidifier disinfectant was none of the business of no ministries was interested in that. But Ministry of Environment said that was my issue. And hydrofluoric, I mean, kind of contamination, kind of accident was not a kind of business. I mean, it was not a the issue of none of the ministries, but it was taken by the Ministry of Environment, and those made that the environmental pollution has become one of its ministry's kind of agenda in 2017, just before this Changjeom, just as the Changjeom Mao town study was conducted. So that has, I think, contributed a lot to this management issue. And I think the difference between Negi and Changjeom was whether there was an active ministry or not. For the Negi, there was no ministries, no kind of administrative structures who have been involved in this topic. But for the Changjeom, it was different. But let me give you another kind of story. I mean, here, 청주 북이 incinerators, 소각장. In 2019, because there are a lot, the Bugi incinerator town had many cancer patients, and they say this is due to the incinerators. And they petitioned to the this Environmental Health Act, and the committee decided to take that petition as a kind of to study, and the health impact assessment was conducted in a very similar way, in a very kind of the same, actually almost the same kind of researchers did the study of this Bugi, the same researchers from the Changjeom research. And just last month, in 2021, May 13, just about a month ago, I mean, less than a month ago, the town hall meeting was held to give the last reports. And the conclusion was that the evidence was limited, so that it wasn't accepted as a kind of positive outcome, positive result. And this is the newspaper article of just last month. And here's a it's very limited or unclear or not associated. And the town, I mean the community, is requesting another study actually. So because of that, and so why then? Why almost the same study method and almost the same researchers, almost the same kind of ministry, but why the conclusions, I mean, are different? And actually, in the reports, the cancer was elevated. I mean, we can identify that on multiple databases that the cancers, the kidney and also others were increased. And also the measurements in the environmental media, some of them were high and some of them were not detected, and some of them were somewhat variant. But we can say that in the area, in addition to the incinerators, there are many other sources, and not all those sources are studied. And biological monitoring gave a clear concentration distance gradient, so that those who are near to the incinerators, a higher level of pollutants in the body. So it gives you a kind of a more or less consistent result about the relationships but was interpreted. I mean, was kind of interpreted as a negative study in the final presentation. One of the reasons might be that more than 10% of the national solid waste, I mean, the solid waste of the whole nation, more than 10% are incinerated here. So it's very big part, I mean, very big kind of stake in terms of waste management. And now we have, as COVID-19, a lot of masks and protective gears, and those are thrown away as a kind of a waste. So we have an increase in the solid waste actually during last several, I mean, some period. So because of this, well, you cannot find, you cannot have a kind of suitable alternative place, alternative plans to change this kind of problem and so on. That's kind of here I talked about. Well, some of the environmental injustice can be brought by this environmental movement itself, because the preservation of the environment means that you do not want to have this pollution in your backyard or in your town. And so here the NIMBY is not in my backyard, has been kind of indicated as a product of this environmental preservation or kind of the environmental kind of heightened environmental protection. And well, some say it's an environmental elitism by the middle and upper class against kind of the lower class, I mean, town and so on. And so, well, here in this region, I mean, not only this region, but also 장점 and also 내기, and those are the areas with agricultural background, old age people, and short education. I mean, with very few ways of kind of vocalizing their demands. So these can seem to act as kind of a factor, or as a kind of structural factor against a kind of fair participation, fair preservation, fair protection, and so on. And so in that way, I think the structural risk is there. Structural risk is there, but I didn't kind of pay attention to that in my study to tackle, how to tackle this kind of factor. What I mean, the structural risk can be interpreted differently by different approaches, actually. In psychology, some say personality is structural, or in behavioral science, the prior belief can be regarded as structural, or in statistics, the AI is actually kind of finding the less variable component of the data, a structural component of the data, and so on. And also in sociology as culture, political economy as regime, in history as past dependency, and so on. These are talked about as less variable or more kind of fixed determinants of the outcome. And I draw all different from the philosophy to the history to the individual. And here in statistics, some of the numbers are random, but some of the data are not random. and it becomes artificial intelligence and so on. But where is the structure? I guess somewhere in between, somewhere in kind of in this setting. I guess structure, we say there is some less variable, more fixed determinants of our feature. And this is kind of paradigm, the kind of framework by determinants of health approach. Here, they call this part as a structural determinants of social determinants of health inequities and governance, macroeconomic policies, and social policies, public policies, culture, and social value are listed as one kind of more or less structural. But I think the real structure encompasses more than this, more than this list. And in the as a background of the structure, I think the evolutionary fixed one, or historically fixed, customized one, and generationally separated one, and so on. The institutionalized one also, because of the availability in the policy, the limitation in the policy actually acts as a structural factor in addressing the problems and so on. And so in this lesson, I want to emphasize that there are factors in determining the health risks, not only the proximal and more mechanical ones, but also very distal but also very structural ones. So these are the structural ones, and I think we can reclassify the traditional risk factors in public health. Traditionally, we have focused on these physical, chemical, biological factors, and also sometimes psychosocial or economic and behavioral factors. But these are more or less material and also relational risk factors. And I think we have to add, in addition to this, some structural factors that can persist over the time. I think I have to push forward because of the time. These structural factors, I think, can be cognized. You can be aware of that by the coupling and persistence. In coupling, I mean such as environmental injustice are noted in those areas with less privileged society. So if you can notice that coupling over and over, that's a structural. And why structural factors are important? I think it indicates the repeated, persistent problems. And without addressing these factors, these structural risks, I think the downstream ones, such as technical failures, will re-emerge again and again in many different areas. So that's the reason why I think we have to pay attention to the structural factors. And that was my first lesson. Oh, I spent around 40 minutes. The other lessons are more or less short, so let me proceed. For the second lesson, I think these factors, the risks, causal factors, should be investigated together with alternative. What I mean alternative is here, the problems are investigated for its cause, or kind of the underlying, the ones that kind of brought this problem. So usually we study the cause and effect as a set of the problem. But I think we have to also think about the alternative system to solve the problem. Without addressing this alternative system, I think we ended up solving only easy problems at the level of very simple technical ones. And there are many alternatives in public health. We can approach the alternatives from behavioral science viewpoint or risk communication viewpoint, or in some way more fundamental political economy viewpoint. But not much for the cause of the cause, or repeated, persistent, and structural causes. And some of the alternatives that could have been proposed for this structural, the cause of the cause, was some uncoupling remedies, or the change in the structure itself. And usually these uncoupling remedies have been proposed in terms of the training, education, and prohibition of the very typical ones. What I have noted in publication of their research, I noticed that there has been some changes over the years, and this is kind of the material for the authors in the BMJ Global Health, or the author information. So these are the kind of guidelines when writing the paper. And when I first began my career, there was no concept of kind of the institutional review. There was no such kind of process of an institutional review when I first began my kind of research in Korea about 30 years ago. And the copyright issue was also very vague. So there was kind of no concept of self-plagiarism. And the idea of data sharing was also a very new one, or open data opening is a very new one. And peer review deposition is also a very new one. But the most striking feature that I found in recent publication is that it requires kind of the statement about co-production of research with patient and public in terms of defining research, designing the study, recruiting subjects, and so on. So these statements are necessary if you want to submit your work to the journal. And that makes me quite curious. I mean, why journal requires, these statements as a kind of paper requirement? I think that has to do with this basic nature of causality and alternative. I mean, as I said, causality can operate at multiple levels, from proximal to distal. So the alternative should also span from micro to macro. And in doing that, I think consulting the kind of the target group is the necessary one for the journals, I guess, as well as to the researcher himself. So the alternatives at different level, from micro to the macro or societal level, can be kind of devised. And one of my kind of the experience that made me to think about that was from Jeju community hospital study. It was done in 2012. There was a kind of cluster of spontaneous abortions and also congenital anomaly. And so they requested me to take a study why that has happened. And I gave a first report in 2012. But that was not enough. That was not enough. So I gave a kind of second report in 2013, 14. And what happened was, in the end, in 2020, the Supreme Court of Korea have returned the case. I mean, they decided that the children who are born to a mother who have been exposed to mutagen or reproductive problems are eligible for the industrial accident compensation. So they kind of change the alternative system. I mean, they change the system so that the industrial accident compensation not only compensate the workers, but also their kind of offspring, their kind of children. So this happened when I kind of studied this at first in 2012. It wasn't clear how we can solve this problem. But after we did that, there were kind of several developments. This is kind of the result of the study, actually, in short. So there were cluster of anomaly and also abortion. And so I did a kind of basic study about comparing this to the whole nation or Jeju province and so on. And clearly the congenital anomaly in this group was very high, about not around 100 times higher, but very high, yeah. And one of the problem we found, I mean, kind of we could indicate was that the drug dispensing at the wards. What happened was because in this hospital, most of the patients were old age with CVA, cerebrovascular stroke, or the dementia. So they could not take the pill, I mean the tablet by themselves. So the nurse have to grind the pill and then have to feed through the nose, I mean through the e-tube, I mean, yeah. So that created kind of exposures to those who have been providing this grinding the pill and supplying the drugs. And so we did. The problem was that was shared almost all the workers there. So they did almost all the same task. So what we did was we waited 1 more year until 2013 and do the kind of follow-up study about, I'm sorry, about yeah, before 2011 and after 2011. And it was significant when we did that before and after study with this group. This so in doing in carrying out this study, my role was kind of evidence finding, just on the whether that makes any kind of causal relations or how that occurs and so on. But I couldn't change anything under that system, under those, I mean, under that system that I did the study. I mean, in that system, they didn't take the workers' offspring as eligible for compensation. So I couldn't do anything. But the trade union and also the civic groups, including women's issue group or children's issue group, kind of was combined together, and they brought this case to the Supreme Court, up to the Supreme Court, and over more than almost 10 years, they kind of continuously kind of try to change the system with alternative ones. And finally, that when that has happened, I guess my role was, I guess that was my role. I mean, so if from this second lesson, if I summarize, why is the system alternative important? I guess the first answer is that problems are investigated for their causes only when appropriate alternative to the cause can be found. So with no alternative, there is no investigation, especially for structural causes. And without considering the alternative system, nothing in the current system can be fixed, as they have been already managed by the current system. And the professionals will examine problems in his or her expertise, and solutions will be fragmented in narrow scopes without a system. And the typical example is risks in developing countries are unnoticed, not because they cannot be studied, but because they cannot be managed. So this tells you about why you have to think about alternative system in the study. The lesson 3 is about victim approach. The alternatives, I think, should be devised by or with the most vulnerable groups, especially on the aspects of who should bear the burden to managing the uncertainties in risks. Let me explain. I'm sorry. From my experience, the fixing problems can brought when these two are combined, One is based on the causality, and the other is based on victims. Let me see. This is I have been involved in asbestos study from probably in early 90s, and this shows you the consumption of asbestos in Korea over the time, and the asbestos has been controlled by Industrial Safety and Health Law in 1981, and even under this, the asbestos is officially a kind of controlled substance, but there has been no change in the consumption itself over the period. Only when, in 1994, the first case of mesothelioma was diagnosed, then after that, the consumption have declined. It kind of shows you what is contributing, I mean, to the control. Not just a kind of the legal, I mean, the law itself doesn't work to kind of to solve this problem. I mean, and here you can also see that this is the level of asbestos fiber in the air, and it has been quite high, even under this kind of legal, legal measures. And one example that I can give you is this faxed document in 1988. This was faxed from the Mipo dockyard to Exxon Houston to United States. And this is a report by one of the industrial hygienists who had worked in this Mipo, which you know the Mipo Joseon, Mipo dockyard in Ulsan, to inspect, I mean, to kind of monitor the asbestos removal activities of their kind of vessel in Korea. So he came to Korea, inspect the work process, and report back to United States of this report. There is about 2-page long report, and there are other kind of things. But let me just say, this ship is full of asbestos, and he's saying that there was no compliance whatsoever in doing the job. So they didn't wear any masks. They didn't do any educational training. They didn't kind of abide by anything in 1988. At the time when we have Industrial Safety and Health Act saying asbestos is a carcinogen, controlled substance, doing such and such things, but nothing was nothing was abided by at the time. And as I said, in 1994, the first case was diagnosed, and soon after, this problem has been evolved. And this is a picture of 2008 in Busan, kind of forming a victim group. This are mainly the kind of workers who had worked in asbestos textile plant in jail asbestos. I mean, and after this, actually, we have observed that in 2009, the asbestos was banned, and 2011, the compensation had started, and 2013 or 12, I mean, we have kind of asbestos control act to control the removal process. I mean, to have a safe removal process of asbestos from the kind of environment and so on. So, so we can say that with the activities of the victims, the many changes have occurred. Many changes have occurred. But I noticed there are a little bit of subtle differences between the environmental problems and also occupational problem, as asbestos can be exposed both at the workplace and both at the community. So a little bit of the difference. It was very kind of interesting or curious. But so in occupational, the workers or who are removing the asbestos or working in the asbestos facilities are the ones who have the exposure problem. But as for the environmental, those who use as a consumer product like baby powder or live, I mean, reside nearby to the facility or kind of send their children to schools who are renovating, which are renovating and so on. So these two groups are a little bit different. And the political scientists say that the political window for risk control is different by this social construct, whether it is a positive one or negative one, whether it has a high power or low power, I mean, in decision making. And so these are the occupational groups should behave differently from the environmental groups. And also in terms of cost benefit match, also the occupational and environmental groups are different in terms of seeking political window or kind of the management of the problem. And so the scope of a compassion of these victims, I notice a little bit different. The occupational victims get together as a class, and they are mainly socioeconomic activities. And the environmental groups get together as a kind of value sharing group. And they have more or less kind of activities based on the common lifestyle. And so they have differences in economic issues and culpability, and also the number or size of the victims and so on. But I noticed that in Korea, as we solve over the years, as we solve the problems, the red and green group, I mean the labor group with the environmental group, they could get together, and they kind of they work together in terms of making alternative and indicating the underlying cause, and indicating, I mean, the taking processes, and also aligning with other groups. So they could work together, and only when it happened like this, we could solve the problem. Let me just skip this. So what I have noticed from working with asbestos victims is that it was a change from victim to survivor. So it was a change from risks to uncertainties. So at first, we talked about only the risks, but as we go on, we talked about the uncertainties in the risk. And also, it was from compensation to prevention. And also, it was from the merit to equity. So at first, it was who are the eligible based on the merit, based on the kind of damage and so on. But in later, it was about the equity, about how we can get together, solve this problem together and so on. So it was from disease to human rights. So that was more or less the kind of the changes that I observed. And also in doing that, these alternative, from the victim to the survivor, the rights has contributed a lot. It was right to know, right to choose, and right to act. And there have been different dimensions of the rights for different level of problem, different level of problems of information, problems of knowledge, and problems of wisdom. So probably I won't elaborate on this much, but I think this table is important in how we can change the victims to survivors. There are some concrete ways that we can work with the victim to get information based on right to know, to get information based on right to choose, and so on. So these are the kind of tools that I think we can work together with the victims. And so let me conclude my third lessons. Why is or was the victim approach important? I think as I talked about the new requirements for the journal article about patient and public involvement, I think in that way, victim is a very proper participant because the victims can indicate the holistic, that means not just factors, but pathways of the problem. So, and also the victims, by involving victims is ethical, based on the free will of the victim. They can answer to the question about who will bear the primary burden of uncertainties in the causality, and what will be your kind of choice when the burden of uncertainties in the causality are laid bare to you, and who will be responsible for delineating the whole spectrum of uncertainties of the causality, and so on. So involving the victim in the study is, I think, holistic and also ethical. Because of that, I think the change has been possible. And lesson 4, probably I have to skis, but the lesson 4 is about the process of change. I think hasn't been, in my case, in most of my case, the change wasn't that straightforward or kind of incremental. It often was convoluted, and it was open stepwise. That corresponds to some, in some way, opening of the policy window. And in most cases, the change depended on the feedback whether we could have feedback or not. That kind of made the changes. However, system is by definition stable. So if you have a system, that can be a system because it is stable. System maintains its stability by interconnected and feedback flow of stakeholders. And only in some way, there are two kind of changes. One is the improvement. The feedback process is used to improve. You know, I don't know whether you know about the Six Sigma activities. Six Sigma represent 6 standard deviation. Sigma is a standard deviation. When you have a 6 standard deviation, the probability is 1 in million. Very, very few. So if you can bring your product good in less than, if you have the, what is that? 불량품. If you have some defect in your product in less than 1 in million, it's a very kind of remarkable achievement. And the process to make that is feedback process of this statistical correlation. But the change itself is more or less a cultural phenomenon, actually. It's not incremental. It's not kind of some say there are two things. One is social amplification of the risk. That means rippling of the effect by the secondary impact, secondary reactions and so on, and also coupled with this policy window. So when you have a problem stream and policy stream and a political stream, and if that corresponds to each other and window opens, then the political scientists say that you can have a change. So this rippling and window opening seems to be necessary. But how can you do that? How can you make this social amplification and also window opening? How can you do that? I think there are 3 different change processes here. One is cultural change. And second is I talked about from victims to survivors. And the third is about the system change itself. I said that system is by definition stable, but at certain point it can change. It should change. And that has to do with this data to information, from information to knowledge, and so on. And first, something about the cultural change. There are many kind of researchers who share this view of view with Edgar Schein about the change process. He says about the change in 3 steps: unfreezing, changing, and defreezing. The unfreezing is kind of in your refrigerator. If you take the plug out over time, it's unfreezed. All things, and this is disconfirmation. You are taking the plug out, and it's about the survival anxiety or guilt. It's about overcoming the learning anxiety and so on. That's an unfreezing process. And in the changing, you have trial and error process. And in defreezing, you are reconnecting with others again in the new position. So Thereby, you have a change from unfreeze the state to the refreeze the state. And we have observed actually many of those changes in different areas, in different cultural feminism. I don't know whether I can say it's a Me Too movement or not. Racism in Korea. We have a lot of Venom, Denom, Kopina, but also K-pop becomes more or less shy. I mean, something. And I don't know whether we are looking at K-pop as through the racist lens or not. And Kondeism, I don't know whether it's a correct translation, but abusive paternalism has been changed also. And McCarthyism and bullying and winner takes all. These are all kind of cultural phenomena that have been tackled, that have been kind of feedbacked in recent years and so on. And I think in these changes, kind of the survival anxiety or guilt was operating in our society, so that this is not correct. What should we have to do, and so on. This creates some feedback in this cultural change. And let me talk about why I think the change is not easy, but should be kind of brought over the steps by talking about Samsung study and Samsung episodes. It was actually a long story, actually. In 2007, a women worker, Hwang Yumi, died of leukemia, and it raised a kind of red flag about the conditions in the workplace, because at the same processes, the same workplace, there was another leukemia case at the same kind of work station. And semiconductor epidemiology kind of was conducted, but was put aside because they say it's temporary, and it doesn't. Sorry. And so I kind of went into the factory in 2009. Not only Samsung, but Hynix and Emco, and so it's more or less kind of a study about fabrication of semiconductor in Korea. And I will talk about the result, I mean, later, but it wasn't kind of accepted as in constructive way, so the dispute went on through the court, and 2015, even the kind of recommendation by mediation committee was rejected. I mean, Samsung decided that they will do. I mean, they will do their own way. So and so at the end, in 2018, the arbitration was held, and finally the problem was kind of the solution was accepted. But over this period, there has, even though I'm saying this as kind of chronological orders, there has been many side stories, such as I'm getting old. Who was the owner of the Samsung? 이건희. Yeah. He fell down in 2014 or something. And so that was a momentum, actually. That was a momentum. So that was the reason why this mediation, they didn't accept anything from outside. They decide they say they will do by their own. But once the Igoni kind of had some problem, situation have changed. And also, but still, they didn't kind of take the recommendation from others. And in 2018, they finally, took the arbitration committee's recommendation as the kind of son was kind of indicted through this what is that presidential kind of what is it, 박근혜 and so on, the problems. So I think if that didn't happen, if that wasn't kind of operating, the story might have been different. It was very opportunistic and was very convoluted. It was very reactive in many ways. So these stories are not just straight incremental changes. It did something, but disappeared. Was in vain, and later tried something, but wasn't conclusively accepted. And so these were happened over time. And controversy actually was about companies say there is no evidence of especially the carcinogen at the workplace, and victims say they have been dealing with many different chemicals and so on. This is the father, I guess also the daughter was brave. What he said was that it's not about money. It's about why my daughter had died. I have to know, and I have the right to know. Was kind of I said that the change from victim to survivor is like from the compensation to prevention, or from the just one case to the whole case, or to the whole system and so on. So here Mr. Huang was very pivotal in transforming this demand from just a compensation to the proper investigation and prevention. So that happened. I guess not just as kind of over the one night, but it happened a little bit on the way, and also the system has been also tackled, and when you say you have different system, or this system should change, it's somewhat difficult to what is the current system and what is the kind of the alternative one. And so you might depend on the typology of the system, and some classify the system based on the archetypes or regimes, like a liberal system or corporatist conservative system or social democratic system and so on. But I here more or less try to see the system as a kind of a story, as a way how the stakeholders are interconnected with each other and how their roles are checking with each other to in solving the problems and maintaining the outcomes. And this is the kind of way to classify the typology. I mean, here's cultural recognition types. So here, hierarchy individualistic type, and hierarchy communitarian type, and here egalitarian communitarian type, and egalitarian individualistic type, and so on. So these are the way, I mean, the typology of how the risks are perceived and handled, and so on. But I don't think, I mean, but that's not my way of classifying the system. Here is the way that I kind of propose, I mean, that I think is useful in public health. It is the system about why, who, what, how of the risks are handled and solved based on data, or based on information, or based on knowledge, or based on wisdom, and so on. And to do this kind of data acquisition system, you need to have a role for different stakeholders to do certain things. Or to have an information assessment system, you need to have a specific roles for that system also, and so on. And so here we can say the level of a system as from based on their kind of how they are connected, based on what evidence, something like a data generation activities, system for data generation, or system for information assessment and dissemination, or system for knowledge validation and translation, and system for action and learning, and so on. And this is what I found when I went into the Samsung. They have two, one in Gihung, one in Onyang. This is a fab, and this is kind of the assembly line for the semiconductor. And this is in an official way, the kind of the number of chemicals they say use at the factory. So in Gihung, they have 83 chemicals, toxic chemicals are used. And out of 83, 28 have been designated by the government to be measured. And out of this 28, the measured and checked up was only 18 by the company. So this is kind of just a number, but tells you about what activities, what kind of activities are performed at the workplace, at the kind of, so we can say that the assessed risk is very limited in scope and depth. And the targets of assessment is very regular work schedule and no short-term exposures, no shift works, and no sporadic exposures, and so on. So this way, the assessment was incomplete, and also validation was non-existent, and so on. That's a very simple fact, but tells you about what system the Samsung has been operating to do health and safety kind of management. So, we try to kind of validate what they have measured by analyzing the ingredients of their kind of products, I mean, separately from their kind of measurement line. And some of the products contained some kind of controversial, I mean, components like benzene or other toxic chemicals. And so in those ways, you can assess how the data is collected and how that is assessed, how that is validated, how that is really employed in decision making, and so on. So that's the way that we say your system is still very incomplete. And so you have to work on that. But it has failed. I mean, there's no kind of feedback by this measurement or assessment to the proper system and so on. And that has to do with they have a measurement system, but they don't have a proper assessment system, or they don't have proper validation and so on. So it sometimes is a kind of technical problem, or sometimes it's a managerial problem, or sometimes it's a cultural, like what is really valid in your decision making, like the legal code is the ultimate criteria to decide the validity of your decision. But the legal code can change actually over time. So it's not a science. The legal code is a more or less political compromise and so on. So depending on what you believe is the ultimate criteria for deciding the validity or the kind of the truth will make the culture different from one workplace to another. And in that way, I think Samsung was very closed, very more or less, they are very systematic, but it's not feedbacked in. I mean, there is no feedback mechanism to check their kind of the system from outside. It was very difficult, very, very difficult one. So there are many ways in this system to make it change. It can actually the alternative system can be devised based on why, who, what, and how in terms of different alternatives, different feedback, and different feedback base, and different kind of objectives and so on. But the most important one, I think, is the who are the stakeholders who can participate and discuss these things and so on. And so I think the system change. I said in stating this the last lesson, I said that system by definition is stable, but it can change based on cultural change and from victim to survivor, and also from systematic way of collecting data, assessing information, validating knowledge, and applying the wisdom. And so this way, I think if these are combined, then there has been system. But in my experience, as I said, was convoluted, not straightforward, not just a kind of incremental ways. And so in this talk, I talked about 4 lessons for change by fixing problems. And based on Nagy experience, I think we have to kind of focus not only on the causal factors themselves, but also layers or the path of those factors up to the structural kind of upstream. So that was my first lesson. And second lesson, based on Jeju Community Hospital, we need to have not only study the problem itself, but also propose an alternative or kind of figure the alternative together with this problem set. Otherwise, the change is very limited. The change is very kind of the individualistic and technical ones. And from the experience of asbestos control, what I have learned is that the victim-oriented approaches in devising alternatives, especially to distribute the burden of uncertainties away from the vulnerable, is important. And it is holistic and also ethical in bringing about these changes. And fourth, from the Samsung experience, my conclusion is that the changes are not linear or incremental, but convoluted and stepwise. By combining the all areas of cultures, stakeholders, and also systems. So that was my kind of 4 lessons that I want to share with you through this program. And I'm not sure whether my talk makes any sense to you, or and I'm sorry, because of the language, it took more time. Yeah, it's not to say in English. It takes time. I mean, actually, in Soma. And also, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare the kind of material beforehand so that you can have a chance to look before. But anyhow, I tried to upload that. What is that? What is that? The chatting box. Not that. Yeah. So if you have questions or kind of yeah, I got some questions in the chatting. Okay. The first question from Professor Song-Kyun Kim probably is, what if we don't have persuasive alternatives to address present issues against environmental health after intensive researches? Well, my short answer might be that you shouldn't be the only one to do the research. I mean, if you can have, let's say, the victims or other stakeholders in designing and carrying out your research, they will share their kind of concerns together. And also, so in that way, the alternative, even though it may not, oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, there are 2 questions actually. Yeah, the first question was about environmental justice, and according to my definition, environmental injustice is unfair distribution of environmental benefit burdens of protection. So it is not environmental justice, but injustice is kind of unfair. I guess this is kind of saying the environmental justice in the other way around. So I'm here talking about injustice, not justice, but I don't know why. So there are several kind of ways to define the injustice, but this is one of the components, I think, unfair distribution. And also the second question is about by comparing Negi and Jangjam, you mentioned that attitude and leadership of central government appear critical in resolving the conflict against environmental justice. The attitude and leadership might be important, I guess, but I think more than that, the Ministry of Environment had a kind of history of dealing with environmental health issues as their own agenda for I guess for over 10 years, from about only 2000 to now. So that made the Ministry of Environment in the central government more receptive about the structural way of addressing these environmental health issues. So that, but I think they have their limitation. From my experience, they are still, what is that? The privileged officers. So they don't dare to commit kind of more courageous, more kind of more fundamental reform by themselves. They just bring others to lay out the opinions and so on. So that's the way, usual way of this government officers to tackle the problem. But still, the Ministry of Environment are taking this environmental health issue as their own agenda, and I think we have to push that further to make a stable structure inside the ministry. That was my kind of impression. Sorry. And if we don't have persuasive alternative, in research, well, to my experience, I said the researcher himself or herself is very limited in deriving the alternative system. I mean, bring the alternative system. So I guess I myself didn't do very well, but I recommend work with others, work with the community, work with victims, work with other areas to make this alternative more acceptable, to more imaginative, to more fundamental, and so on. And this is from 법학을 전공하는 송이수라고 하는데요. 안전보건의 precautionary principle을 적용하는 문제를 주제로 하여 박사학위 논문을 작성하고 있는데 논문의 오늘 자료에 포함되고 있는 내용을 이용해도 되는지 여쭤본다. 특히 근로자 인용을 허락하신다면 당연히 출처는 정확히 바랄 것입니다. 온라인이지만 교수님 말입니다. I'm sorry, I did. Well, I guess it's okay. I think there is no kind of what's that? The knowledge is free to share. her with all other people. I think what is that, the knowledge in the left movement. This another question is, firstly, I want to express my deepest appreciation to you as a student dreaming to make a better risk-prepared and pain-sharing society. Your whole academic life has taught me how to work with people and speak up resisting social injustice. My question can be a little bit personal. What made you keep going and keep dreaming even while you are witnessing a gigantic resistance to change? And so I'd like to hear your personal goal or dream after completing your career as this. I feel I'm wow, this well, I talked that, I mean, the first case I talked, Negimal, actually, I think was a failure for me. The second case, the Jeju Island study, was, I didn't prepare the kind of alternative. I mean, it was by others. So it was in some way incomplete. And the third one, the asbestos, we could solve the problem, but I think in some way by accident. I don't know, by historical accidents. I could stumble in different groups and then could meet different stakeholders. So I contributed a little, but just only by accident. And the fourth one, that made me think quite a lot. What is important in really driving the kind of change? I think one thing that I can recommend to Ha Jae-young here is that when you are faced with resistance, you would not want to give up, but you want to kind of delve into, I mean, you want to think deep why the others are resisting and what is the fundamental kind of logic and cause of that resistance, and how you can deal with that, their concerns too, and to make this go forward. So thereby, I think resistance itself is a kind of invitation to do more work. I mean, it's not itself in that you are wrong. It is in itself make you more. I guess that's an attitude. Yeah, the attitude the problem. And what is your lesson from your experience of humidifier disinfectant issue? Still ongoing, still ongoing. Recently, from this humidifier, I mean, disinfectant issue, I was kind of, different people, I mean, lawyers, victims, researchers in kind of measurement science, in health science, all have different ideas, all have different ideas. So one of the goal to learn in this humidifier disinfectants is to learn how people think, what is their way of kind of understanding the phenomena, and how I can stand in their position together with my position, so that we can communicate each other. So that's yeah, my recent kind of my recent kind of task that I have to handle. Yeah. Wow, another one. And 김신범 선생님이 왔네요. 저는 피해자란 시스템적으로 배제된 이해 당사자가 아닐까 합니다. 참여와 결정의 주체로서 이해 당사자의 권리가 인정되고 시스템 내 이해 당사자의 지위와 관계가 보존되는 것이 중요하다고 생각합니다. 그런 면에서 피해자에서 생존자의 변화가 중요하다는 말씀에 대해 전체적으로 동의합니다. 원진 피해자들이 만든 연구소에서 일하는 저로서는 피해자 개인들의 수준에서 결단하고 극복하는 것이 얼마나 숭고한 일인지 알지만 그렇게 개인과 피해자 그룹에게만 맡겨놓는 것은 너무도 미안하고 고통스러운 일인 듯합니다. 시스템 내 관계 변화가 있다면 개인의 결단과 용기를 조금은 완화해 줄 수 있지 않을까 생각합니다. 가능할까요? 예. 근데 기본적으로 제가 뭐 이걸 이렇게 여기서 데피니트하게 말씀드리는 건데 피해자가 다른 피해자를 보면서 그게 이제 같은 점도 알게 되고 그러면서 좀 더 구조적인 문제에 집중하기도 하고 그리고 얘기를 하는 도중에 그 구조를 어떻게 넘어설 수 있는 것인가 피해자들끼리죠. 얘기하는 중에 넘어설 수 있는 것인가에 대한 것도 나올 수 있는 것 같아요. 근데 그런 면에서는 그러니까 그러니까 피해자가 피해자를 돕는 그런 어떤 프로그램 내지는 그 시스템을 만들어내는 것도 이런 문제를 하는 데 도움이 되겠다고 생각을 하는데요. 글쎄요, 김지원 선생님하고 또 따로 얘기를 해야 될 것 같습니다. 예. 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 알겠습니다. 근데 제가 영어를 하는 것 죄송합니다. 제가 완전히 이게 제가 그렇게 예. 예. 그렇군요. 글쎄요. 지금 뭐 시간은 이제 맞춰야 될 것 같습니다. 예. 그래서는 저걸 하는데요.